I'm 78 years old now. I've had a lot of time to think about the kinds of people who quietly hollowed out my life. Not all at once, slowly, over decades. They didn't take things from me by force. I handed pieces of myself over, one reasonable choice at a time. The first kind of dangerous person I ever met didn't look dangerous at all. He looked like success, confidence, certainty. He was the man who always seemed to know what mattered and what didn't, the kind of man people listened to without questioning him. I met him in my late 20s, when I was still trying to figure out who I was supposed to become. Back then, I was hungry for direction. I had a young wife, a baby on the way, and a job that paid the bills but didn't feel like it meant anything. I wanted to be someone my father would have respected, someone my neighbors would nod at with approval. When this man spoke, he made it sound simple. Work harder, stay focused, don't get distracted by feelings. Feelings don't build anything, he used to say. I believed him. I followed him, not literally, but in spirit. I adopted his voice inside my head. Every time my wife asked me to come home earlier, that voice told me I was being tested. Every time my son cried at night, and I pretended not to hear it, that voice told me this was sacrifice, necessary sacrifice. That kind of person doesn't hurt you by shouting. He hurts you by convincing you that love is something you can postpone, that presence is optional, that there will always be a later. I told myself I was doing it for my family. That's the lie that makes everything easier. Years passed. Promotions came. My name on doors, then plaques. People shook my hand and said I was doing well. At home, my wife learned to stop asking. She became quieter, more efficient, less interested in my stories. I noticed it, but I told myself it was temporary. Everything was temporary back then. The second kind of dangerous person came dressed as loyalty. This one took me longer to recognize. He was the friend who always agreed with me, the one who laughed at my complaints and told me I was right to feel wronged, the one who said, "You've done enough. You deserve more." We worked together for years, long lunches, longer conversations about how unappreciated we were, how no one understood the pressure we were under, how our wives didn't really get it. He never told me to do anything outright. He didn't have to. He just made my resentment feel justified. That's a powerful thing, having someone tell you your worst instincts are reasonable. I didn't see how small my world was becoming, how every conversation turned into a complaint, how every relationship became transactional. What do they give me? Do they recognize my effort? Do they make my life easier? My wife tried to talk to me once. I remember it clearly because it was one of the few times she cried in front of me. She said she felt like a roommate, like someone renting space in my life. I listened, nodded, said I was tired. Later that night, I told my friend she was being dramatic. He laughed, said marriage goes through phases, said women are emotional, said I was doing my best. That kind of dangerous person doesn't pull you away from people. He gives you permission to stay exactly where you are while calling it wisdom. By the time I reached my 40s, I had learned how to be absent without technically leaving. I was there for birthdays. I was there for holidays. I was there in photos, but I wasn't really there. My mind was always a step ahead, calculating, planning, worrying about what came next. The third dangerous person didn't even come from outside. This one lived inside me. I didn't recognize him as a separate thing for a long time. I thought he was just discipline, responsibility, maturity. He was the voice that told me rest was weakness, that stillness was laziness, that if I stopped moving, everything would collapse. He kept me busy, productive, exhausted. I missed my daughter's school play because of a meeting that could have been an email. I told myself it was unavoidable. I missed my father's last lucid conversation because I was catching up on paperwork. I told myself he'd understand. I missed entire seasons of my own life because I was afraid of what would happen if I slowed down long enough to feel them. People praise that kind of man, the reliable one, the tireless one. They don't see the cost until it shows up years later in the way your children talk to you like a stranger, in the way silence follows you from room to room. By the time I noticed the damage, I was already practiced at minimizing it. Everyone's busy, I'd say. This is normal. This is life. It's amazing what you can normalize when it benefits your sense of control. The fourth dangerous person came disguised as patience. This one whispered, "Not yet." He told me there would be time to fix things, time to apologize, time to reconnect, time to slow down. Whenever guilt crept in, he soothed it. "You're not a bad man," he'd say. "You're just busy right now. Do it later, when things calm down, when the kids are older, when work eases up." I believed him because I wanted to, because the alternative was facing the possibility that some windows don't stay open forever. My marriage didn't end in a dramatic fight. It faded. Conversations became logistics. Affection became courtesy. One evening, my wife told me she felt lonely even when I was sitting right next to her. I remember looking at the television while she spoke, nodding, thinking about an early meeting the next day. She moved out 2 years later. No yelling, no betrayal, just exhaustion. That was the first time I felt something cracked that couldn't be repaired. But even then, I told myself I'd reconnect with my kids once things settled, once I got my footing again. They were teenagers by then, already learning how to live without me. The fifth dangerous person is the hardest to talk about because he doesn't look like a person at all. He looks like comfort, familiarity, routine. He's the one who convinces you that what you have is enough, even when it's quietly killing you. He kept me in the same job long after it stopped challenging me, kept me in the same habits long after they stopped serving me, kept me telling the same stories, seeing the same people, avoiding the same conversations. Comfort is seductive. It doesn't ask for anything. It doesn't demand growth or courage. It just asks that you stay. Years passed faster after that. They always do. My children grew into adults with their own lives, their own distances. Phone calls became shorter. Visits became rarer. I told myself that was normal too. Then my health began to fail in small ways. Knees, back, memory. Nothing dramatic, just enough to remind me that the future I'd been postponing was shrinking. I remember sitting alone one evening, looking at old photographs, my children as toddlers, my wife smiling in a way she hadn't smiled at me in years before she left. My younger self, convinced he was doing everything right. That was the night it finally became clear to me. None of the people who damaged my life ever meant to destroy it, and neither did I. They were dangerous because they made delay feel safe, because they dressed neglect up as responsibility, because they taught me to trade presence for approval, connection for control. I don't know how many days I have left. Fewer than I think, probably. I'm not afraid of dying the way I'm afraid of having lived half a life without noticing. If you're listening to this and you feel a quiet unease, like something important keeps getting pushed to the side, pay attention to that. Not urgently, just honestly. I didn't know the moment would arrive so quietly. You expect clarity to come with noise. Sirens, hospital monitors, a phone call in the middle of the night. But for me, it came on a Tuesday afternoon, sitting in my car, hands on the steering wheel, unable to remember why I'd driven to the grocery store. I wasn't lost exactly. I knew where I was. I just couldn't place the reason. I sat there longer than I should have, watching people load bags into their trunks, watching a man help an elderly woman return her cart. I remember thinking how kind he looked. Then I realized I was older than she was. That should have frightened me more than it did. I went home without buying anything. The house felt different that day. Not unfamiliar, just thinner, like a place that had already started letting go of me. I made coffee I didn't drink and sat at the table where my kids used to do homework. There were still faint scratches on the surface from pencils pressed too hard. That's when I understood something had shifted. Not broken, shifted, like a door closing softly in another room. The diagnosis came months later. Mild cognitive impairment, they called it. A phrase so gentle it almost sounded polite. The doctor spoke carefully, reassuringly. "We'll monitor it. It progresses differently for everyone. Stay active. Stay engaged." I nodded like a man used to nodding, like someone still pretending he had time to spare. But I knew. Deep down I knew. I had spent my whole life betting on later, and later had finally arrived with an empty look on its face. That's when I started thinking about the people I'd avoided my whole life without realizing it. Or worse, the people I'd welcomed in and listened to. The ones who didn't push me off cliffs, but guided me gently away from myself. I thought about my children then. Not as they were, but as they had been. The small details came back first. My son's habit of tugging at his sleeves when he was nervous. My daughter's laugh before she learned to temper it around adults. I remembered promising myself I'd be more present once work slowed down. Work never slowed down. I just got slower. I tried calling them more after the diagnosis. Not to tell them, not at first, just to hear their voices. They answered politely, kindly, but there was a distance I couldn't bridge with frequency alone. Relationships don't store warmth indefinitely. They cool when unattended. One evening I finally told my daughter. She was quiet for a long moment, then said she was sorry I was dealing with that. Her voice was gentle, controlled, the way you speak to someone you're not sure how to comfort. After we hung up, I realized she hadn't asked me how I was feeling. Not because she didn't care, but because we hadn't built that kind of closeness. Not anymore. That's when regret stopped being abstract. Regret isn't dramatic at this age. It's practical. It shows up when you need something and realize you never learned how to ask. When you want company but don't know who to call. When your memories feel richer than your present. I began to see how each dangerous influence had trained me. The man who equated worth with output had taught me to ignore my inner life. The friend who validated my resentment had made isolation feel justified. The voice inside me had kept me running until there was nowhere left to go. Patience had whispered me into paralysis. Comfort had padded the walls until I couldn't feel how small the room had become. None of them forced me. That's the hardest part to accept. I chose them, over and over. There was a day, not long after the diagnosis, when I tried to write letters. To my kids, to my ex-wife. Not apologies exactly, more like acknowledgments. I wanted to name things I'd never said out loud. I stared at the paper for a long time. The words felt heavy, not because they were hard to find, but because I didn't know if they still mattered. When you wait too long, sincerity can feel intrusive. I wrote a few sentences anyway, about wishing I'd listened better, about being proud of them, about loving them in ways I hadn't known how to show. I mailed them, then I waited. My son called first. He thanked me, said it meant something to hear that. He sounded sincere, but he also sounded complete, like a man who had already built the life he needed without me. My ex-wife never responded. I don't blame her. Some chapters don't need footnotes. As my days grew quieter, I started paying attention to the smaller truths, how loneliness doesn't always hurt sharply. Sometimes it just hums in the background, like an appliance you forget is running until the power goes out. How time feels different when you're no longer planning ahead, just managing what's left. I thought often about how many times I'd told myself, this isn't the right moment. How many conversations I'd postponed because I wanted them to go smoothly, because I wanted to be ready, because I didn't want to feel uncomfortable. Avoidance wears many disguises: responsibility, prudence, self-control. But at its core, it's fear of discomfort masquerading as wisdom. If I could speak to my younger self, I wouldn't tell him to work less or relax more. That kind of advice slides off people who aren't ready to hear it. I'd tell him to notice who makes him feel smaller without raising their voice, who convinces him that waiting is the same as choosing, who benefits when he stays busy enough not to ask questions. Dangerous people aren't always the ones who hurt you directly. Sometimes they're the ones who make it easier for you to hurt yourself slowly. There's a man I see sometimes at the park near my house. He sits on the same bench every morning, feeding birds from a paper bag. He's older than me, I think, or maybe just more worn. We've exchanged nods but never spoken. One day I sat beside him. We watched the birds for a while. Then he said, without looking at me, "Funny how quiet it gets when you finally have time." I laughed, surprised by how much it stung. We didn't say anything else. We didn't need to. I've learned that understanding comes late because it's expensive. It costs you illusions. It costs you stories you've told yourself to sleep at night. It costs you the comfort of believing everything happened the way it had to. Some things did happen that way. Many didn't. As my memory falters in places, other memories sharpen. I remember moments I once dismissed. My daughter asking me to watch the sunset with her. My wife asking me what I wanted, not what I needed to do. My son waiting at the window for me to come home. Those moments don't accuse me. They just exist, patient, untouched by my explanations. If you're younger than I am, this may sound like a warning. It's not meant to be. It's just an accounting. This is what happens when you mistake delay for strategy and endurance for meaning. Life doesn't collapse all at once. It thins, quietly, until one day you realize you've been living in the margins. I still have good days. Days when the light falls just right through the kitchen window. Days when I remember a joke and laugh out loud. Days when my son sends a photo of his kids, and I feel something warm and real. I hold on to those days without squeezing them too hard. I don't know how this ends for me. None of us really do, no matter how much we plan. I do know that the people you avoid aren't always strangers. Sometimes they're voices you trust. Sometimes they're habits you defend. Sometimes they're versions of yourself you refuse to question. If any part of this sounds familiar, you don't need to fix your life today. You don't need a dramatic overhaul. Just notice who benefits from your absence. Notice what you keep postponing. Notice how often you tell yourself there will be time. Time is generous, but it is not patient. I'll end this the only honest way I can. I did many things right. I also waited too long to do the ones that mattered most. Both things can be true. If this meant something to you, sit with it for a moment. Not to act, just to notice. That's where everything I missed began.